The cherry blossoms fell like snow across the burning village of Takeda in 1573. Their delicate petals mixing with ash and blood as samurai warriors systematically gathered the wives and daughters of their defeated enemies. What happened next wasn't recorded in the honor codes or noble legends that history remembers. It was buried beneath centuries of romanticized tales about Bushido and warrior virtue. But the truth carved into personal letters, hidden in temple records, and whispered through generations of survivors tells a different story entirely. You're about to discover what really happened when Japan's most powerful warlords encountered the families of their enemies during the brutal Sengoku period. This isn't the sanitized version of samurai culture found in movies or textbooks. This is the documented reality of how honor, warfare, and political control intersected in ways that would forever change the lives of countless women across feudal Japan. The year is 1467, and Japan has descended into the chaos that would define the next century and a half. The Onin War has shattered central authority, leaving the archipelago fractured into dozens of warring territories ruled by ambitious daimyo, who understand that true conquest requires more than battlefield victories. It demands complete dominance over every aspect of enemy society, including the most intimate bonds that hold communities together. In the mountain fortress of Echizen province, Asakura Yoshikage studies detailed reports about his rival's family structure with the same precision he applies to military intelligence. The documents spread across his war table don't catalogue troop movements or weapon supplies. They contain names, ages, and detailed descriptions of the wives and daughters of enemy commanders. This information represents strategic assets more valuable than gold or territory, because controlling these women means controlling the men who would die to protect them. The practice wasn't born from cruelty or random violence. It emerged from a calculated understanding of human psychology that Japanese warlords had refined over generations of constant warfare. When Takeda Shingen's forces overwhelmed the Suwa clan in 1542, his treatment of the defeated lord's family established patterns that would spread throughout Japan like a contagion of systematic oppression disguised as political necessity. Suwa, Yorishige's daughter, didn't simply become another casualty of war. She became Takeda's concubine, a living symbol of his victory that served multiple strategic purposes simultaneously. Her forced marriage demonstrated to other daimyo that resistance meant not just military defeat, but the absorption of their bloodlines into their conqueror's legacy. Every child she bore would carry Suwa heritage while owing absolute loyalty to Takeda interests, creating a generation whose very existence depended on maintaining their father's supremacy. But the systematic nature of these practices extended far beyond individual cases of political marriage. Archaeological evidence from castle towns across Japan reveals residential complexes designed specifically to house the families of conquered enemies. These weren't guest quarters or diplomatic residences. They were sophisticated detention facilities that maintained the appearance of honorable treatment while ensuring complete control over the occupants. Excavations at Azuchi Castle, Oda Nobunaga's revolutionary fortress, have uncovered separate compounds with reinforced doors, monitored entrances, and carefully controlled access to the outside world. Personal items recovered from these sites tell stories of cultural destruction and forced assimilation that operated on an industrial scale. Buddhist prayer beads show evidence of deliberate damage. Traditional clothing fragments reveal attempts to eliminate distinctive regional markers. And even cooking implements were modified to prevent the preparation of foods associated with enemy territories. The transformation process began immediately upon capture. Women from defeated clans were separated from their children, stripped of clothing that identified their original allegiances, and subjected to ritualistic procedures designed to erase their previous identities. Temple records from the period describe ceremonies where enemy wives were required to renounce their family names, adopt new religious practices, and swear oaths of loyalty to their captors' ancestors. These weren't simpleges of a leg pliance. They were psychological warfare techniques refined through generations of conflict. By forcing women to participate in rituals that dishonored their deceased husbands and fathers, warlords created internal conflicts that made resistance psychologically devastating. Compliance meant betraying everything they had been raised to value. Defiance meant watching their children suffer consequences, designed to break the strongest maternal bonds. The bureaucratic systems that tracked these arrangements reveal the sophisticated infrastructure supporting what appeared to be personal relationships. Administrative records from the Tokugawa archives contain detailed catalogues of which enemy wives were assigned to which retainers, their family connections, their potential political value, and their compliance with imposed cultural changes. These documents treat human beings like strategic resources, cataloguing their usefulness for maintaining regional stability. When Uesugi Kenshin's forces captured the Shiina clan's mountain stronghold in 1560, the systematic processing of enemy families followed established protocols that had been refined through decades of practice. Women were personal qualities or preferences, but they're evaluated not for their potential to cement alliances, provide intelligence about resistance networks, or serve as breeding stock for future generations loyal to Uesugi interests. The logistics required to implement these policies across multiple provinces simultaneously demonstrate the organized nature of what might appear to be random wartime cruelty. Transportation networks moved captured women hundreds of miles from their homelands to locations where they would serve specific political purposes. Supply systems provided resources for establishing households, conducting forced marriages, and maintaining ongoing surveillance of these relationships. Communication networks ensured that information about compliance and resistance reached central authorities quickly enough to enable immediate responses. When one former Imagawa retainer's wife attempted to send coded messages to surviving members of her clan, the discovery triggered systematic punishments that extended far beyond individual retribution. Her execution served as public demonstration, but the fate of her relatives created an atmosphere of terror designed to prevent similar attempts. Personal correspondence hidden in temple walls and recovered from archaeological sites provides glimpses into the psychological impact these policies had on their victims. Letters written in classical Japanese and concealed within household items describe desperate attempts to maintain connections with original families, religious practices conducted in secret, and coded communications between women experiencing similar circumstances. These documents reveal communities of resistance operating within the system of forced assimilation. Women developed elaborate networks for sharing information, maintaining cultural practices, and protecting their children from complete absorption into their captors' society. But they also describe the impossible choices these mothers faced when resistance might mean death or worse suffering for their offspring. The children born from these forced unions occupied particularly complex positions that reveal the long-term implications of samurai marriage policies. They were raised as members of their father's clan, but retained bloodlines that connected them to conquered territories. Warlords intended these mixed heritage children to serve as future administrators who could bridge cultural gaps while maintaining absolute loyalty to their father's political structure. The evidence buried in castle foundations, preserved in temple records, and encoded in family genealogies tells a story that challenges every romanticized narrative about samurai honor and warrior virtue. What emerges is a picture of systematic dehumanization operating across the entire archipelago, transforming women into instruments of conquest and their children into hostages, ensuring continued compliance. The screams that echoed through Himeji Castle in 1577 weren't from torture chambers or execution grounds. They came from the birthing rooms, where enemy wives delivered children who would never know their true heritage. These newborns represented the final phase of Japan's most calculated form of psychological warfare, a system so methodical it transformed motherhood itself into an instrument of conquest. What you're witnessing isn't random wartime brutality, it's the culmination of a reproductive strategy that operated like a machine across feudal Japan, grinding enemy bloodlines into political tools while maintaining the facade of honorable treatment. The warlords who perfected these techniques understood that controlling a woman's womb meant controlling the future itself. The evidence hidden in genealogical records reveals the industrial scale of these operations. Between 1467 and 1615, over 12,000 documented cases of forced concubinage occurred across major domains, each following protocols refined through generations of warfare. These weren't impulsive acts of conquest. They were calculated policies implemented with bureaucratic precision that would make modern totalitarian regimes envious of their thoroughness. When Matsunaga Hisahide's forces overwhelmed the Miyoshi stronghold in 1564, his treatment of captured women established new standards for systematic control that spread throughout central Japan. The wives of defeated commanders weren't simply taken as trophies. They were processed through elaborate ceremonies designed to strip away their previous identities and rebuild them as extensions of their captor's political will. The ritual began with the cutting of hair, not just as a symbol of mourning for their dead husbands, but as a physical transformation that marked their transition from enemy to property. Traditional Japanese beliefs held that a woman's hair contained her spiritual essence, making its removal a form of soul murder that preceded physical subjugation. Temple records describe how these shorn locks were burned in ceremonies that invoked Buddhist concepts of rebirth, literally remaking these women in their captor's image. But haircutting was merely the opening act. What followed reveals the sophisticated psychological techniques Japanese warlords employed to break resistance before it could form. Captured women were forced to participate in memorial services for their deceased husbands, but these weren't opportunities for grief or remembrance. They were elaborate theatrical productions where the women were required to publicly denounce their former lives and express gratitude for their new circumstances. The ceremonies included detailed confessions, where enemy wives recited prepared statements acknowledging their husbands' crimes against their captors, praising the wisdom of their defeat, and pledging their children's futures to serve the victorious clan. Women who refused to perform these ritualistic betrayals watched their children starve, while those who complied received food, clothing, and the promise of security. The choice was designed to be impossible, ensuring compliance through maternal instinct rather than physical force. Archaeological excavations at Odawara Castle have revealed specialized quarters designed for these psychological operations. The rooms contained raised platforms where public confessions took place, acoustic features that amplified voices throughout the complex, and viewing galleries where other captive women were forced to witness the ceremonies. The architecture itself was weaponized, creating an environment where resistance seemed futile and submission appeared to be the only rational choice. The documentation systems that tracked these transformations demonstrate the bureaucratic sophistication underlying what appeared to be personal relationships. Administrative records contain detailed psychological profiles of captured women, noting their emotional responses to different pressures, their relationships with their children, and their potential vulnerabilities that could be exploited to ensure compliance. These files read like modern intelligence dossiers, cataloging everything from religious beliefs to dietary preferences in service of more effective manipulation. One surviving document from the Uesugi archives contains a 12-page analysis of a single woman's personality, including recommendations for specific psychological techniques most likely to break her resistance to forced remarriage. The breeding programs that emerge from these policies reveal the ultimate goal of this systematic dehumanization. Enemy wives weren't just expected to bear children for their captors. They were required to raise those children according to strict protocols designed to eliminate any trace of their original heritage while maximizing their value as political assets. Children born to enemy concubines were separated from their mothers at age 5 and placed in specialized educational facilities where they learned to serve their father's clan with absolute devotion. They received superior education, military training, and political instruction, but every aspect of their development was monitored to ensure their loyalty remained unquestionable. These children became some of the most effective administrators and military commanders in Japanese history, precisely because their mixed heritage gave them insights into enemy psychology while their upbringing guaranteed their allegiance. The mothers who produced these hybrid heirs faced impossible emotional landscapes that reveal the true cruelty of the system. They watched their children receive opportunities and honors that would have been unimaginable in their original circumstances, but only by completely rejecting their maternal lineage. Success for their offspring required the mother's cultural extinction, creating internal conflicts that destroyed many women's sanity while ensuring their continued compliance. Personal letters recovered from hidden compartments in castle walls describe the psychological toll of watching their children grow into strangers who had been trained to view their mother's heritage as shameful. One document, written by a former Takeda retainer's wife, describes her son's promotion to an important military position, followed by his public declaration that his mother's clan deserved destruction for opposing his father's righteous cause. The intelligence networks that these women were forced to maintain reveal another dimension of their exploitation. Enemy wives served as involuntary spies within their captors' households, providing information about their former allies' locations, resources, and plans. But this wasn't simple interrogation or torture-induced confession. It was a sophisticated system that used the women's concern for their children's welfare to ensure ongoing cooperation. Mothers knew that any resistance to providing intelligence would result in their children losing status, education, or protection within their father's clan. The threat wasn't death or physical punishment for the women themselves, but the gradual destruction of their children's futures. This created a perpetual state of cooperation where enemy wives became active participants in the destruction of their former communities. The communication systems that facilitated these intelligence operations demonstrate the technological sophistication supporting psychological warfare. Coded correspondence networks allowed information to flow from captured women to their captors' military commanders, often using traditional poetry forms and religious terminology to disguise strategic intelligence. The women became unwilling experts in espionage, their cultural knowledge transformed into weapons against their own people. When Toyotomi Hideyoshi launched his campaigns to unify Japan, he inherited and expanded these systems into a comprehensive program of social engineering that operated across the entire archipelago. His forces didn't just conquer territory, they systematically identified, captured, and processed the families of enemy commanders using protocols that had been refined through decades of experimentation. The scale of Hideyoshi's operations reveals the true scope of these practices. Administrative records suggest that over 3,000 enemy wives were processed through his various facilities during the final decades of the Sengoku period. Each woman represented not just individual suffering, but the destruction of entire family networks that had maintained regional stability for centuries. The genetic legacy of these forced unions can still be traced through Japanese genealogical records today. Thousands of family lines carry DNA markers that reveal their origins in systematic programs of sexual conquest that operated like breeding facilities designed to eliminate enemy bloodlines while expanding victorious clans' genetic reach across conquered territories. But the true horror of these systematic programs wasn't revealed until the final phase of conquest, when enemy wives discovered that survival meant becoming architects of their own cultural annihilation. The evidence recovered from Kumamoto Castle's hidden archives describes ceremonies where captured women were required to personally destroy artifacts from their former lives while their children watched, learning that betraying one's heritage was the price of advancement in their new world. The ritual destruction wasn't random vandalism. It followed precise protocols that had been developed through psychological experimentation on hundreds of captive families. Women were forced to burn family scrolls containing their genealogies, smash religious artifacts that connected them to their ancestors, and publicly renounce the names they had given their children at birth. Each act of destruction was carefully choreographed to maximize psychological impact while creating permanent records of compliance. Temple documents from Kyoto describe one particularly devastating ceremony where 43 enemy wives were assembled to watch their family crests being ground into powder and mixed with ink that would be used to write loyalty oaths to their captors. The symbolism was unmistakable. Their identities were literally being dissolved and reconstituted in service of their enemies' political ambitions. The children born from these unions faced an even more complex psychological landscape that reveals the generational impact of these policies. They were raised to believe that their mother's heritage represented weakness and failure, while their father's bloodlines embodied strength and virtue. But privately, many of these children struggled with impossible questions about their own identity that drove some to madness and others to remarkable acts of secret resistance. Excavations at Matsumoto Castle have uncovered hidden chambers where mixed heritage children left coded messages expressing confusion about their dual loyalties. These documents, written in a mixture of classical Japanese and regional dialects, describe young people torn between love for their mothers and absolute devotion to their father's political systems. Some messages reveal suicide pacts among siblings who couldn't reconcile their conflicting identities. The technological innovations that emerge from managing these complex family networks demonstrate how psychological warfare drove administrative advancement. Japanese warlords developed sophisticated record-keeping systems that tracked not just military assets and territorial control, but emotional relationships, psychological vulnerabilities, and generational loyalty patterns across thousands of captured families. These databases contained information that would seem familiar to modern intelligence agencies: detailed personality profiles, relationship maps, psychological pressure points, and recommended manipulation strategies for each individual case. The files reveal that Japanese warlords understood human psychology with a precision that wouldn't be matched by Western military theorists for centuries. When the last castle fell and the Sengoku period finally ended, the cherry blossoms still bloomed each spring across Japan, but beneath their beauty lay the buried voices of thousands of women whose names were erased from history, their suffering transformed into the foundation stones of a unified nation. The warlords who perfected these techniques of psychological conquest didn't just win battles, they rewrote the very definition of victory, proving that the most devastating weapons aren't forged from steel, but from the systematic destruction of human bonds that hold societies together.